Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. We're tackling World War I this time around.
Oh, yeah, this will be good.
You brought an amazing collection of sources, articles, excerpts, really gets to the heart of it all.
Definitely.
Why a war? Over a century ago and still. So impactful today.
Absolutely.
I think we're going to uncover some things that maybe people haven't heard before.
I think you'll be surprised. Take the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. Just the tip of the iceberg, really.
So not just about that one event in 1914, then?
No, not at all. More like the
It's-
match that lit the fuse. We're going to dig deeper. To understand World War I, you got to understand what was already brewing in Europe for years, decades even.
Okay, lay it on us then. What was going on?
Historians call them the MAIN causes. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. Like a powder keg, ready to blow.
MAIN. I like it. Easy to remember.
Yeah.
But what did that actually look like back then?
Picture this. Germany, Great Britain in a naval arms race. Huge battleships, bigger guns, everyone trying to one-up each other. That's militarism.
Uh-oh.
Doesn't sound too good already.
And it wasn't just them. Every big power was stockpiling weapons, getting suspicious, scared.
Recipe for disaster. You mentioned alliances too, right? Making things worse.
Absolutely. A tangled web it was. Promises, obligations, the Triple Alliance. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy. Then you have the Triple Entente. France, Russia, Great Britain. One country goes to war, the others are dragged in like dominoes.
So that one spark could set off a whole chain reaction.
Exactly. Then you throw in imperialism, like the scramble for Africa, Europe's powers grabbing land, resources, colonies, creating more tension, more mistrust.
And then nationalism on top of everything else. I was reading one of the sources you gave, and there was a line, "My country, right or wrong."
Perfect example. Nationalism can be a powerful force, sure,
Yeah.
but it can also be twisted, used to pit people against each other, especially in the Balkans. That was a powder keg within the bigger powder keg of Europe. Lots of different ethnic groups, political tensions. So we've got militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, all simmering away. And then Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. Boom.
Right. Assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. He wanted Bosnia free from Austria-Hungary.
So Austria-Hungary is furious.
They were. And they had Germany's backing. They saw a chance to flex their muscles, put Serbia in his place. They issued an ultimatum. Harsh terms.
And Serbia just caved?
Well, they agreed to most of it, but not all. Not the parts that threatened their independence. Austria-Hungary saw their chance. Declared war on July 28, 1914.
And the dominoes start falling. What happens next?
Russia, allied with Serbia, they mobilize their troops, are ready to defend their ally.
But that triggers Germany.
It does. They're bound by their treaty with Austria-Hungary. So August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia.
Oh, wow.
2 days later, they declare war on France. That's Russia's ally, remember.
So in like a week, 3 huge powers are at war. How does Great Britain get pulled in?
That's where Belgium comes in. Neutral little Belgium. Germany decides to invade them on August 4th.
Why?
It was part of their plan to get to France quickly. But Great Britain had promised to protect Belgium's neutrality. They saw the invasion as, well, an outrage, a violation of international law.
So they had to act.
They did. Same day, August 4th, Great Britain declares war on Germany.
So a small regional conflict, suddenly it's continental-wide.
Exactly. Those alliances. Supposed to prevent war, ended up making things way worse.
Yeah.
What was localized, suddenly it's global. All because of that one event in Sarajevo.
Unbelievable. I bet the world was terrified. No one could have predicted how big this would get.
No one.
And you said earlier there were multiple fronts in this war. Let's talk about the Western Front first. That's the one everyone pictures, right, when they think of World War I.
Yeah, the Western Front. Brutal. A stalemate. Trenches stretching across France and Belgium. New kind of warfare. Trench warfare. Horrific. Casualties on a scale never seen before.
It's just miles of mud and trenches.
Exactly. And in between, no man's land.
No man's land. Even the name is scary. What was it like for the soldiers stuck there?
Hellish. Wasteland. Constant shelling, barbed wire, bodies everywhere. Just surviving each day was a victory.
I was reading a diary entry from a British soldier. He talked about the smell of death, the fear of snipers.
You really need those first-hand accounts to understand. These men lived through terror, hardship, enemy fire, disease, rats, the constant shelling. It did things to their minds, too.
And then there were the battles themselves, some of the most brutal ever.
The Somme, Verdun, Ypres. Hundreds of thousands dead for just a few yards of land.
Somme started July 1916, right? That one was especially bad.
The first day, the bloodiest day in British military history. Almost 60,000 casualties, over 20,000 dead. Just gone.
It's hard to even imagine. And it went on for months.
5 months. Over 1 million casualties on both sides total. Just for a sliver of land.
It's mind-boggling.
And it wasn't just the Western Front. The Eastern Front, too. From the Baltic Sea all the way to the Black Sea. More mobile fighting, but still, the casualties were immense.
And you mentioned other fronts, too. Italy, Ottoman Empire, even Africa and Asia. Truly a global war.
It was. World War I, it was like nothing before. The Ottoman Empire, they were with the Central Powers, fighting Russia in the Caucasus, Britain in Mesopotamia, that awful Gallipoli campaign. Italy, they actually switched sides. Started with the Central Powers, then joined the Allies in 1915. Battled Austro-Hungary on their northern border. Even battles in Africa, Asia, all over their colonies.
Wow. It's hard to grasp just how widespread it was. It's 1917, Europe's exhausted, millions are dead, battles raging everywhere, and then the U.S. enters the picture. They were neutral until then, right?
Right.
What changed?
A few things. First, Germany started unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking any ship they thought was helping the Allies. Even civilian ships. Passenger liners?
Didn't go over well, I imagine.
Not at all, especially after the Lusitania. Sunk in 1915. 128 Americans died. Public opinion in America had shifted big time.
I can see why. That's horrific.
It was. And then, early 1917, the Zimmermann telegram. British intelligence intercepted it. It was from the German foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, to their ambassador in Mexico.
What did it say?
Germany wanted Mexico to attack the U.S. If the U.S. joined the war, that is.
Wait, they wanted Mexico to attack the U.S.? Bold move. Did they think Mexico could actually pull that off?
Germany was desperate. They were facing a two-front war, potentially. They needed to keep America out, distract them somehow. They promised Mexico money, help getting back land they lost in the Mexican-American War. But yeah, it was a gamble.
A bad one, it sounds like.
The telegram was published in American newspapers. Outrage, fury. It basically guaranteed the U.S. would join the war.
So the Lusitania, then the Zimmermann telegram. U.S. declares war on Germany in April 1917.
Yep. Huge turning point. American troops, resources. It helped the Allies a lot. But it's important to remember, Germany was already in trouble. Shortages, unrest, even Austria-Hungary, their empire was falling apart. Different ethnic groups all wanting their own nations. The Ottomans, too, stretched too thin, fighting on too many fronts. They were crumbling. Yeah, by 1918, the Central Powers, they were falling apart.
Yeah.
Germany especially. Blockaded by the British Navy. Shortages everywhere. People were tired of war, unhappy with the government.
Makes sense. 4 years of brutal fighting.
Exactly. Austria-Hungary, too. It was like a house of cards ready to collapse.
Yeah.
So many different ethnic groups, all wanting their own countries. And the Ottoman Empire, they were in trouble, too. Overextended, fighting on too many fronts.
So it was just a matter of time until it all ended. But how did it end? What finally brought the fighting to a halt?
November 11th, 1918. Germany signed the armistice. They had no choice, really. Defeated on the battlefield, revolution brewing back home.
Armistice Day, a day a lot of countries still remember. But signing a piece of paper, that didn't just erase all the damage, right? The anger, the resentment.
You're right. The Treaty of Versailles, that was the real reckoning. Signed in 1919, it was supposed to officially end the war, create a lasting peace.
It didn't exactly work out that way, though.
It didn't. A lot of people say the Treaty of Versailles actually helped cause World War II.
I've heard that, too. What was so bad about it? How could a peace treaty lead to another war?
Well, imagine you lose a war, and then you're forced to take all the blame, even if you think it wasn't all your fault. That was Germany, the war guilt clause. They had to give up land, reduce their military to almost nothing, pay huge reparations to the Allies.
It sounds incredibly punishing.
It was, and it backfired. Germany was humiliated, economically crippled, perfect breeding ground for extremism, resentment. That's how Hitler was able to rise to power.
So instead of peace, the treaty created more problems.
It did. It's understandable the Allies wanted revenge, but in the end, they created more instability, sowed the seeds for another war.
Let's talk about the human cost of the war. It's almost too big to grasp, isn't it?
It is. About 10 million military personnel dead, 7 million civilians, entire generations wiped out, and the injuries. So many men came home with physical wounds, psychological scars, families torn apart.
A whole continent shattered. And the political map of Europe, that was redrawn too, right?
Absolutely. Empires collapsed. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, and new countries emerged. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Poland.
The world was completely different after the war. Were there any positive changes? Or was it all just terrible?
Well, it wasn't all bad. The war actually pushed technology forward. Medicine, communication. And women, they'd been working in factories doing men's jobs while they were away fighting. They started demanding more rights, more equality.
So the world was changing.
It was. Things couldn't go back to the way they were before the war. And there was a real desire for peace, lasting peace. That's what led to the League of Nations.
Ah, the League of Nations,
Yeah.
1920, right. President Woodrow Wilson, he was a big supporter.
He was. The idea was to prevent future wars. Collective security, diplomacy, working together to solve problems.
Didn't quite work out, though, did it? World War II happened anyway.
Unfortunately not. The League had some big weaknesses. They couldn't really enforce their decisions. And some important countries, like the U.S., they never joined.
Wait, the U.S. never joined, but it was Wilson's idea.
I know, right? It's ironic. But the Senate, they refused to ratify the treaty. They were worried about getting dragged into foreign conflicts.
So the League was kind of powerless.
In a lot of ways, yes. And there were other problems, too, like the Treaty of Versailles. It created so much resentment in Germany. And then the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, made things even worse. And then you had the rise of totalitarian regimes, Germany, Italy, Japan.
Yeah.
They didn't care about the League. They did what they wanted.
So the League, it was a good idea,
Right.
but it was doomed from the start.
Maybe. It shows how important it is to have strong institutions, sure. But you also need cooperation, understanding, a real commitment to peace. Otherwise, even the best plans can fail.
We've talked about the political changes, the League of Nations, but World War I, it affected art and culture too, didn't it?
Absolutely. It was a huge shock.
Yeah.
All those romantic ideas people had before the war about glory and heroism, gone.
Yeah.
The war was brutal, senseless. And you see that reflected in the art and literature of the time. Writers like Hemingway remark,
All quiet on the Western Front. That book is so powerful. I remember that line. We are little flames poorly sheltered by frail walls against the tempest of dissolution and madness.
it really captures the feeling of the war, doesn't it? How fragile life was, how close to madness everyone felt. And it wasn't just literature. Art movements like dadaism, surrealism, they emerged from the chaos of the war. Painters like Otto Dix, George Grosz, they show the brutality, the hypocrisy. Composers like Stravinsky, Holst, their music reflected the anxiety of the time.
It's like the war changed everything, the way people saw the world, the way they expressed themselves.
It did. People had to confront the darkness, the evil that humans are capable of, and they had to find new ways to make sense of it all.
It's been over a century since the war ended, but it still feels relevant today,
Oh, it's
especially
like-
with all the conflict and tension we see in the world.
It does, doesn't it? People think history is just the past, something in a textbook. But World War I, it shows how much the past shapes the present, and it's up to us to learn from it so we can build a better future.
Yeah, it's sobering, but important, to remember these things, especially now, when things feel so uncertain, so many conflicts popping up around the world.
It's easy to think history is over and done with. That has nothing to do with us now. But World War I,
Yeah.
it shows us that's not true. The past shapes who we are and what we do. It's on us to learn from it so we can do better.
You keep coming back to those lessons. What's the biggest one? The one our listeners should really take away from all this? How can we actually use what we've learned about World War I to make the world better?
I think vigilance. We got to be on the lookout for the warning signs, the things that lead to conflict, extreme nationalism, countries building up their militaries, when diplomacy fails, when people stop talking to each other.
So recognize those things early on before it's too late.
Exactly. We got to be informed, pay attention, and speak up. When our leaders are making bad choices, we can't just sit back and think, oh, it'll never happen here. History shows us anything can happen.
There's a lot of responsibility, but it makes you realize we can actually do something. We're not powerless.
We're not. It's not about being gloomy or dwelling on the bad stuff. It's about using what we know to make better choices, to stand up for peace, to build connections between countries, between people, to understand each other better.
Now, we've learned a lot today about the war itself, the impact it had, the failed attempts at peace, the road to World War II. What do you hope our listener will remember most about World War I and its legacy?
I think the biggest takeaway is war is not glorious. It's not an adventure. It's brutal. It destroys. It leaves scars on everyone, on everything. It's a reminder that peace is incredibly valuable, and it's something we have to work for every day, not take it for granted.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you and our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into World War I. It's a dark chapter in history, but it has a lot to teach us about the complexities of war and the importance of peace.
It was my pleasure. I hope our listeners will keep learning about this. There's so much more to explore, so many stories to hear. Keep asking questions. Keep the memory of this alive, so we can work together to build a world where these things don't happen again.
Until next time, keep diving deep.